Today, we're going to step away from the roar of the crowd, just for a moment, to explore a much quieter psychological space. We're going to talk about the experience of indifference. Let's begin. Our goal here isn't to break down the game itself, but to really understand the inner world of those who just don't feel that pull towards it. And this isn't about not having passion, it's about a different kind of awareness. We're going to explore what it means psychologically to stand apart from one of the world's biggest and most common rituals. All right, so let's start by just acknowledging a very specific feeling. It's that sense of being an outsider to a huge collective ritual, watching this massive cultural event unfold that, for you, just doesn't carry much emotional weight. And just to put this into perspective, we're talking about around 60% of Americans who follow sports. That creates this really powerful, dominant cultural current. So if you've ever felt like you're in the minority on this, well, it's because, statistically speaking, you are. And that position actually gives us a pretty unique vantage point for understanding what's going on. Now, to really get a handle on indifference, we first have to understand the pull of its opposite, right? What is actually happening psychologically when millions of people unite behind one team? And this isn't about judging it, not at all. It's a necessary step to really grasp a different way of connecting with the world around us. So, at its very core, this is all about our ancient, hardwired need to belong. For thousands of years, being part of a tribe meant survival. And sports fandom, it taps directly into that instinct. It creates these modern tribes, complete with their own colors, their own rituals, and a very clear us. It provides a really powerful sense of shared identity. And what's wild is that this connection is biological, it's chemical. When fans watch their team, their brains release oxytocin. That's the same hormone that bonds a parent to a child. So in a very real, neurological sense, their brain is telling them, these people, this team, they're part of your clan, they're family. It's an incredibly profound chemical loyalty. So what about the non-fan then? Well, what we often see is a more individuated sense of self. This doesn't mean antisocial or anything like that. It's more about an identity that doesn't really rely on that strong group affiliation to feel whole or complete. For this person, their sense of self is built primarily from the inside out, rather than being defined by belonging to an external tribe. Okay, so now let's turn inward for a bit. We're going to explore some of the specific brain chemistry and the psychological frameworks that really characterize the non-fan's experience. Okay, this is where the neuroscience gets really interesting. For a fan, watching a game is like a constant drip of dopamine. That's the reward chemical. The total uncertainty of each play creates anticipation, and then the brain gets rewarded with these little hits of pleasure. This is a classic intermittent reinforcement schedule. It's actually the most powerful type known to psychology. It's the same mechanism that makes things like slot machines so incredibly addictive. But for the non-fan, that entire cycle it doesn't ignite. The vicarious thrill of watching other people compete just doesn't activate those same reward centers in the brain. And here's the thing, research suggests this isn't even really a choice. It might be literally written in your DNA, linked to tiny variations in your dopamine receptor genes. Your indifference could actually be biological. This really illustrates a key psychological difference. Fans often do this thing called basking in reflective glory, or burging for short. You'll notice the language, it's "we won." But if the team loses, suddenly it's "they lost." The sense of self gets attached to the success and pushed away from the failure. In contrast, the non-fan tends to have a more stable self-concept, where self-esteem is generated internally and it isn't riding on the highs and lows of an external group's performance. All right, now we can go a layer deeper. We're going to move into the realm of depth psychology here, to talk about where we choose to place our emotional energy, and also the unexamined parts of both of these psychological stances. So here's a crucial point. This is not about a lack of empathy. It's about empathy allocation. Think about it. We all have a finite amount of emotional energy, right? The real question isn't whether you care, but where you choose to invest that care. For some people, it's a team. For others, it just gets directed elsewhere. So where does that energy go instead? Well, some interesting studies show that people with low sports interest often score higher in a personality trait called openness to experience. Their emotional and psychological investment is frequently channeled into areas just like these: art, nature, personal projects, or deep relationships. Basically, places where their empathy can be directly engaged and reciprocated. Now, to truly understand any psychological position, we have to be willing to look at what's unacknowledged, what the famous psychologist Carl Jung called the shadow.
The truth is, every stance we take, whether it's fandom or indifference, has a shadow side.
For fandom, that shadow can show up as toxic tribalism, that us versus them thinking, or even behaviors that look a lot like addiction. For indifference, the shadow might be a kind of defense mechanism, maybe a way to protect oneself from feelings of exclusion from long ago, or a subconscious rejection of competition in general. It's just valuable to gently ask ourselves if our position might have a hidden story behind it. So, where does all this leave us? Well, it leaves us with two very distinct and I think equally valid paths to fulfilling one of our most fundamental needs as human beings, the need for a meaningful story. So on one side, you've got what's called parasocial investment. It's a one-way emotional connection to a team. The narrative is super compelling, it's dramatic, but ultimately you are a spectator. On the other side, you've got direct engagement. This is where emotional energy is invested in reciprocal relationships or personal projects. These are narratives where you are an active participant, and your investment can actually help shape the outcome.
And ultimately, what both of these paths are often seeking is this feeling right here, a flow state. You know that feeling of being so completely absorbed in something that time just seems to disappear? That state of optimal experience? You can absolutely find it watching a championship game, but you can just as easily find it while writing code, playing an instrument, or just having a really deep conversation.
And this really is the central understanding. Fandom and indifference, they are not a matter of right or wrong, or better or worse. They are simply different orientations, different strategies for finding meaning and connection and story in a really complex world. This really leaves us with a final point of reflection. So I invite you to just consider these questions for yourself. Where do you consciously choose to invest your finite emotional energy? And what is the narrative that brings meaning to your life? Thank you for joining me in this quiet exploration. If you found some value in looking at the world through this particular lens, well, maybe there's more for us to discover together on this journey of understanding.